Beautiful. Okay, can everybody see my slides? Thumbs up. Great, beautiful. Okay. It's coming in. Beautiful. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Grief Masterclass. I'm just so pleased you're all here, but it's such a tricky and challenging conversation for many of us to have. And so, I love that you're here. It's not unusual for people to register for a workshop like this and then the grief gets in the way, because we don't want to feel, we're in a society where we're not taught how to feel our emotions. And so it can be very challenging, but it is one of the most important conversations that we can ever have. Now, whether you're in grief yourself or whether you're supporting grief, this masterclass is designed so that those that are leaders, those that are healers, those that are moderating groups or work in therapy, work with people who are grieving, will get lots of rich content. But also for those of you who are grieving, you'll get a lot of tips and tricks and information that are going to be able to help you with your own grief. Now, for anyone that's been to any of my workshops before, I know Diana has, you'll know that I give a lot of information. They're very content rich because my background is organizational development and leadership development, where time is money, and so we bang through the information pretty quickly. So my style is just to deliver a lot of really rich, content rich information. So it would be great. I do hope you've all got a notepad and pen, because you will need to take notes just to really capture as many of those golden nuggets as you can. If possible, I do ask that you have your cameras on. I like my masterclasses to be interactive. You don't need to talk, but I do like to see you. It's just a way to really, because if you show up, you're a lot more engaged with the content. If you've got your camera off, you get distracted and you're not really engaging with the content in the same level. So that is important. So just before we jump into it, I would like to introduce myself, just so that you know a little bit more about me. This is not to impress you in any way, shape or form, but it's really just to let you know that you are in good hands today, that I actually do know what I'm talking about and I'm the real deal. So as I said, my background is HR and organizational development. I've worked in that space for over 20 years now. I've recently received an Australian Women's Small Business Champion Award. I was a finalist in the Sole Trader category, which is an incredible honour. So that was me on the red carpet there. That was just a couple of weeks ago up in Sydney. I've also received a Leadership Development Award for my work through the ARI Institute, which is the Australian Human Resources Institute. I've received an Excellence Award for my work in local government. I've worked as a O operator. In addition to that, I am a coach. So I'm a life coach, a results coach. I'm a coach's coach. Now, this is important because coaching is not a regulated industry. I've done hundreds of hours of study. I've worked with hundreds of clients. And so it's really important if or when you're ever working with a coach that they haven't just done a 3-day course and they're calling themselves a coach, because it's not regulated. So you need to be careful when you are working with a coach to make sure that they are the real deal. So I work with a lot of coaches. So I coach coaches. I get a lot of referrals from coaches as well. So in addition to that, I'm a certified trainer and assessor. I'm a qualified grief educator. I've done my training with davidkessler.com. He's phenomenal. In my opinion, he's the world foremost expert in the grief space. I'm also a healer. So that's what makes me a little bit different. I'm the only person that actually has the set of skills that I have in the world. So I work with a modality called self-directed healing. And self-directed healing, it's quite a revolutionary, it's very fast healing modality that works with really deep emotional pain. And we move that emotional pain energetically through the physical body. It's incredibly profound. It absolutely shifted me in my grief. I wouldn't be where I am today without it. So I am actually the global trainer. I train self-directed healing practitioners worldwide. I've trained a couple of hundred practitioners. So I mentor them worldwide as well. I'm trauma informed. And that's pretty much all you need to know. That's enough, isn't it? So yeah, I've done a lot. I'm quite qualified in this space. When it comes to my grief work, I'm really committed to providing a very safe space for people who are in grief. It is as I said, it's a very tricky conversation. It's not unusual for people to get triggered by having this conversation. As I speak, things will come up for you. And so, it is important to just notice if any of those triggers are coming up, I like to think of the triggers. The triggers are like a map to our pain. They show us where the pain is. But in addition to being a map to our pain, they're also a map to our healing. So, I just really encourage anybody, if your grief comes up as I'm speaking, just let it come up. That's what we're here for. Like, I'm all about actually allowing those emotions to be felt. In many ways, I feel like our tears are a gateway to the soul. It's important that we allow the body to speak in the way it needs to be spoken, in the way it needs to express itself. What happens in our society and many other societies, I know there's a few of you coming in from different places, is that we're not taught to feel. And so we tend to have this tendency to just shut it off and not go there. We just think we're okay and we just get on with it. And so the other thing is, trigger can show up as anger. So if you find that, you're frustrated or things just aren't working, it's just your body expressing itself again, I would note that down. So as I said, get a pen and paper, take lots of notes. It's very content rich. If you're getting triggered by anything, write it down, because that's your work. Your triggers are literally a map to your pain, but they're also a map to your healing. So it's like a torch saying, hey, over here, there's pain over here. I need to do something with this. So just be really, really conscious of that. When it comes to grief, the responsibility will always lie with the griever. I can give people information, but ultimately it's up to the griever to actually implement and action that. I can't go on that journey for you. The people need to step up and have the courage to lean into it. And so when I say lean into it, I'm very much an advocate for leaning in. So if there's something coming up, lean into it. Whatever is in the way is the way. And it's going to be different for everybody, because the grief journey is different for everyone. And so as you go through, for those of you, is there anyone here in early grief? Actually, I'll ask that in a moment. As you go through, depending on where you are in your grief journey, what will happen is in the very early stages of grief, we go into a shock, we go into this numbness. And so it can be quite challenging and quite difficult to take in a lot of information. So just take on what you can. Yeah. It's not unusual for people to come to a masterclass of mine and then come back again later, because I'll run this a couple of times a year. I'll only run this festive edition each December, but I do run the grief masterclass about 2 or 3 times a year. So come back if you need to come back, because what will happen as you move through your grief, the different stages, different things are going to work for you at different points. Different challenges are going to come up at different times. So we're going to be covering a lot tonight. We're going to be talking, or this morning, depending on where you're coming in from. We're going to be talking about grief. We're going to be talking about the grief timeline. I'm going to be sharing a number of tips for those in early grief. I'm going to talk, this is an extra segment that I've added in, about Christmas and special occasions. I'm also going to talk about New Year's, because I didn't know this before grief hit my world, but New Year's is one of the most challenging days in the calendar for grievers. And I'm going to explain why that is, especially given New Year's is coming up. You'll be on the front foot now. So I'm also going to share a section at the end about how to support people in grief, because often we're grieving. But here's the thing, we're not the only person that's lost someone. Like, everyone around you can often be grieving as well, especially if it's a family member. For those of you that are here on a more professional capacity, it's important to understand how to support people in grief. And then at the end, we're going to talk a lot about emotions, all the different emotions of grief, through from sadness to relief, from trauma to shock, and everything in between. But what's really special about tonight is I'm going to take you through a group self-directed healing process. So I'm going to actually give you an opportunity to have a bit of an experience of what self-directed healing is, and to move some of that heavy emotion that's in your body. So stick around, because that's at the end. Now, I do want to mention, I love questions, absolutely love questions. So please write them down. I will not be able to monitor the chat box very well. Unless I ask a question, then I'll be checking the chat box. But I'm watching you guys. I'm watching my slides. I've got a lot going on here. So I won't be watching the chat box. So if you put questions in there, I'll probably miss them. As I said, there's a lot of content to get through. So I'll hold the questions for the end, and I will stay on as long as I need to stay on to answer any questions that you've got. But please write them down, because otherwise we'll get to the end and you won't remember them. So make sure you get them down. Just checking in. I notice a few of you have got your cameras off. If you are able to put your camera on, I do prefer that, because it's just a way to really actively engage and show up. The other thing is actually going back to this one, I do have a grief ebook that I will email out to you all after the session. So I'll be sending that out to you all. That will covers a lot of the information plus more. It doesn't have the information about the Christmas and New Year's though. So that's not in the grief ebook. So I just want to check in. So for those of you that are familiar with Zoom, I do know that a couple of you aren't very familiar, but there is a chat box option down the bottom. So I'd just like to check in just to see what's brought you here today. Are you a griever? Is it early grief? Are you here in more of a professional capacity? Just to give me a bit of an idea of who's in the room so that I can best support you. If there's anything in particular you want to get out of the conversation today, let me know and I'll make sure that that gets covered as well. So just, yeah, jump into the chat box. And I know a lot of us are here for Carl. Thank you. Yeah, supporting NPMO. I am a palliative care nurse. Beautiful. Thank you. Good work. Staying on mute. Yeah, cool. Staying visible in and out. You're from New Zealand. I lived in New Zealand for a while. Sally, welcome. Judith, personal and professional. Thank you. Video is off. Yeah. Eating dinner. We'll see you soon, Carl. All right. Thank you for those of you. Katrina, grieving the loss of my daughter. Oh, that's brutal, Katrina. What was her name? Type her name in the chat box for us. Chantel. Yeah. Let's just take a moment for Chantel, shall we? Brutal. Absolutely brutal. Personal and support. Yeah. Okay, thank you. But that gives me a bit of a feel. So as you can see, people are here for different reasons. So let's get into it. That's why you're here. Why am I here? So I am here because of this gorgeous young man. This is my boy, Aaron. Aaron on the, oops, sorry. On the 14th of March, 2020, so right at the very beginning of COVID, just as Melbourne was going into a state of emergency and one of the longest lockdowns in the world, Aaron was in a car accident and he died on scene. So literally in the blink of an eye, it was like, and for those of you that have experienced a significant loss like this, you will understand it's very difficult to express in articulating words the devastation of losing somebody close to you. And you know, the best way that I can describe it is it's like the very foundations of my world literally got torn out from underneath me, like very literally. He was here one moment, he was gone the next. So with that grief, there was a lot of trauma. So trauma, not all grief has trauma, but all trauma has grief. And so when a loss happens suddenly, like for example, death by suicide, there is so much, you're not dealing just with grief. There's shock, there's trauma, there's so many different layers that are added in with that. And so my life literally changed in the blink of an eye, like in one moment, one phone call, everything was different. Now, to say it's been devastatingly brutal is just the biggest understatement that you could ever say. But this is a road that I will literally have to navigate and journey for the rest of my life. There's no get out of this, you know, because Aaron will always be gone. Aaron will always be gone. Chantel will always be gone. And so what we need to do is we need to learn how to live with that. Yeah, Julie. And Julie will always be gone. Thank you for sharing that, Judith, as well. So the grief that I experienced, very traumatic. It's like nothing else that I've ever felt. But here's the thing. I was at the time, I was working as a life coach. I was specializing in mindset, but I knew absolutely nothing about grief. Like, seriously, I knew nothing about the devastation and the loss of grief. And I really feel like unless you've actually experienced it, it's very hard to understand it. Even if you work in the space, it can be very challenging. And so I know for a fact in my role as a global trainer, you know, I train self-directed healing practitioners around the world. I've trained psychologists, I've trained psychiatrists, I've trained senior nurses, I've trained nurse educators, I've trained counselors, healers, therapists, Reiki masters, you name it, I've trained them. And they will typically say that when they go through and they do their training, they're not actually trained about grief, and they're not trained how to access and release deep emotional pain. And so unless that therapist, that healer, that nurse has actually gone away and done additional training like this and gone in or done a certificate course or extra courses outside of the curriculum, the medical model, our Western, you know, medical model doesn't really cater for grief. We kind of suppress those emotions, and so we're not really taught how to feel it. It's not part of the education that they receive. So unless they go out and do that study, they don't really know. Now, and the other thing is, I mean, if you think about it, we have a 100% mortality rate. We have a 100% mortality rate. Like, and I know this is very morbid, but the fact is we will all die. We don't know when, we don't know where, we don't know how, we don't know at what age, we don't know what's going to happen. But it is almost certain that every single person will experience a deep loss throughout their lifetime. And in fact, the stats actually show that on average, a person will experience a significant loss every 8 to 9 years. Every 8 to 9 years. And so it actually blows my mind now that I'm in this world and I've experienced loss, that we don't understand it more. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this work. That's one of the reasons why I run these classes. Now, I've learned many things. I've learned that in life, tragic things can happen, and they do happen, unfortunately. But I've also learned how precious life is. Life is so very, very precious. Now, we can't change the fact that someone or something that we care about has gone, but we do actually have choices about how we decide to respond and how we're going to move forward with it. You have that power. So this is important. Now, I choose to respond to empower myself. I choose to learn to understand my grief, which is why I'm so happy you guys are here as well. I choose to continually process my pain. I choose to show up and serve others, and I choose to build Aaron's legacy. Yeah, I literally am bringing him on the journey with me. I have him right beside me. I have all the photos, and he comes along, and it's almost like he's the angel on my shoulder. And I use my love for Aaron to motivate me when things are tough, to push me to do some of the things I know I need to do, but I'm procrastinating on, or they're hard. Because let's face it, grief's heavy, grief's tiring. Katrina, you would be absolutely exhausted right now. Abigail, I know you're absolutely exhausted right now. Grief is exhausting. It's literally one of the heaviest emotions we can carry in our body. So I'm choosing all these responses. Now, let me be very clear here. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean Aaron died for a reason. It doesn't mean I'm here, I can give more because he's not here. No. That's not what this is about. It will never be okay that Aaron's not here, ever. Not on any planet, in any dimension in the world. It will never be okay. That's not what this means. But I can empower myself. I can choose to learn how to work with my loss and how to connect with him and bring him with me. So most importantly, I've learned how to process deep emotional pain and how to process trauma so that I'm not stuck in my trauma cycle. so that it's not impacting my life, not impacting the way I interact with people or withdraw from the world. Yeah. So it's about learning healthy, natural, holistic ways that are resourceful to feel that energy. Now, without learning this, seriously, I would not be here in a position to help and serve others. Now, if you think about it, it hasn't even been 3 years for me. I've done so much work to be able to show up here. And that doesn't mean I don't go through moments where I'm absolutely devastated and it's tough, you know. Oh, Katrina, yeah. You know, it was Aaron's 21st birthday on the weekend. It was devastating, absolutely devastating, so brutal, you know, and these things will come up, these special occasions. So I'll continue on. So let me talk for a moment about what is grief. So I'm going to just be very general here. What is grief? Now, grief, by definition, is the loss of something. It's the loss of something. If we lose something, we will grieve. And grief in its purest form is an expression of love. That's my favorite definition. There are many definitions of everything, of course. That's my favorite definition. Grief in its purest form is an expression of love, because think about this for a moment. If you didn't care, it wouldn't hurt. If you didn't love, you wouldn't grieve. They're linked. They're very, very connected. And the deeper the love, typically, the more grief. So grief is love. It's a normal, natural, human response when we experience loss. We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed because we're not broken. We're grieving. We just need to learn how to process our emotion. So grief is love. That's my favorite way of describing grief. Also, when we lose someone or something we love, we will grieve. We just will. There's no way around it. Now, grief has many faces. There is death, of course, but there's also, and it's important to say this, relationship breakdowns, divorce, severe illness, health challenges, disability, losing a job, a career, a business. These are all losses. There's grief with all of these losses. Your home, belongings. I mean, goodness, how many natural disasters do we have these days? I mean, here in Australia, the floods are devastating. They've wiped out thousands of people's homes. The bushfires, you know, we just can't get away from the natural disasters at the moment. And I know all around the world, there are natural disasters. Another loss that's often not given the consideration, not given the support that it needs is miscarriages, infertility, and infant loss. And you know, I'm not going to talk much about this stuff today, but there's a whole heap of information around that as well. Also, pet loss. You know, I'm working with a gentleman at the moment who's lost his dog a couple of months ago. He's devastated. He is not coping. He loved his dog. His dog was his best friend. He is absolutely devastated. And often when it comes to pets, we make a decision. We're put into a position to make a decision to end their life. And so it's not unusual for there to be a lot of guilt around that as well. And so, you know, pet loss is a significant loss that is often trivialized and not given the due consideration that it needs. Now, the information that I'm sharing tonight is applicable to all forms of loss. Grief is grief. So everything that I'm sharing tonight with you is relevant irrespective of the type of loss that you're experiencing. But in the conversation, and when I talk about it, I'll be referring to it as death, just because that is usually the most common reason why most people come through. So grief hurts us. It hits us every which way you can imagine. It affects us physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. Like, it hits us every way you can imagine. And there are so many physical symptoms, and I know a number of you will relate to this, yeah? It increases inflammation in our body. Grief increases inflammation in our body. It increases our blood pressure. It increases our risk of blood clots. There's a condition called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Do you like that? I can say it. It took me a while to be able to pronounce that. It's also known as broken heart syndrome. This is a very real thing. I experienced this. My heart was thumping in my chest, but it was beating erratically and it hurt. It really hurt. It's not uncommon. I've heard because, you know, in my early grief, I was in grief groups and I would talk to other, you know, bereaved parents. And I remember one mum saying, you know, she went to the hospital to be told it was anxiety. It wasn't anxiety, it was grief. So this stuff's really important, because what grief can do is it can literally batter our immune system. And what that does is it leaves us quite depleted and it leaves us very vulnerable to infection. So it's actually really important that we take those steps to move our body, to eat the best foods that we can eat, to stay hydrated, because our energy is so depleted but we need to actually be as resourceful as we can and look after ourselves, because you know what? It's bad enough being in grief without being sick as well. So it is important that you do look after your health. Also, with the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, it's important that if you're experiencing chest pain, shortness of breath, anything like that, you need to get it checked, because this particular condition, it like mimics a heart attack, but you never know. So you must get yourself checked. It's very important. Other symptoms are nausea, loss of appetite, binge eating. People can go either way. Toothaches. I remember I actually ended up in severe toothaches. We were in stage 4 lockdown. It was a whole drama to go to the dentist because everything was shut. But what the reason I had a toothache, this is about 9 months after Aaron's death, was because I was clenching my jaw. The stress, I was clenching. I didn't even know I was doing it. I had to really work hard to relax my jaw. So this is the thing, you don't even realize how it's affecting you physically. It can cause digestive issues, bowel issues. We don't talk about this stuff, irritable bowel syndrome. This is all very normal in grief. Sleeping problems. I've actually just released an article with Brains Magazine, 20 tips for a good night's sleep. So look that up. Depression is another one, anxiety, loneliness. It can really exacerbate your feelings of feeling unsupported, alone, not understood, emotional overwhelm, and suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts are not uncommon in early grief, especially in those early denial stages when you are just in shock and numb. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that you want to die. It's just you don't even know how to live in this world. Can anyone relate to what I'm saying? Yeah. I remember having to go grocery shopping after Aaron died. And I mean, Aaron was a robust, you saw his photo, robust 18-year-old. He ate a lot. And I remember backing out the driveway and just thinking, what's the point? Why am I even here? And it wasn't that I wanted to die. It's just living is so hard. So this is not unusual. Now, I want to say, if anyone is having thoughts of suicide, you do need to reach out to me, because I can support that. With this self-directed healing, I can shift that very quickly. Like seriously, one session. Kid you not. I can release that energy and give that the space it needs to breathe, to be able to, for the mind, for the heart and mind to catch up with each other, to process. So please know that that's available to you. You don't have to get stuck in that whirlpool. Now, I want to talk about sudden loss. What happens with sudden loss? There's a trauma with that. The grief is often intensified, and it can compromise there's a sense of our safety and our security being compromised. So when I talk about sudden loss, I'm talking about death by suicide. I'm talking about accidents, car accidents. I'm talking about overdoses. And I'm even talking about people who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but the actual death comes very quickly and you're not expecting it. So I've actually worked with a number of clients who are grieving a parent, for example. I had one client, her mother had cancer. Now, she knew her mother was dying, but the end came very quickly. And she was quite traumatized by how quickly that all just happened at the end. Even though it was she was in anticipatory grief, she knew it was coming, it was still felt like a very sudden loss for her, and she was really struggling to cope with that. So this is when it's kind of very quick. Also, what can happen is our fear can be escalated because our safety and our security in life, like that foundation of our life, is compromised. We have fear that someone else will disappear. We tend to catastrophize. We have lots and lots of triggers. So, you know, I remember Mum went into hospital and I'm like, oh my God, what if she dies? My cat got sick. I'm like, oh my God, what if he dies? My daughter wants to have friends over while I am away. I'm like, oh my God, what if someone dies? Your mind does that, and it takes a while for that to catch up. So just understand that in sudden loss, we can catastrophize. So be aware if you're catastrophizing. The reality is we actually don't have control. And that's a scary thing. Yeah. So death is literally out of our control. It's very scary when you are living that reality, which I know many of us in this room are. Very scary. So the other thing I want to mention is multiple losses. And I also know that a number of you in the room are experiencing multiple losses. So I'm glad I've included this slide because I don't normally have time for it, but I did add it in. So my intuition was saying I need this slide. When it comes to multiple loss, you need to give each loss individual time. Now, what I mean is it's not actually possible to heal when we're grieving several losses all at once. It's not possible. Your mind can't heal when it's everywhere. Okay? So who's seen that game Whack-A-Mole where the moles pop up and you hit them with a hammer and you run around and you're whacking the moles? Do you know what I'm talking about? Give me a nod, give me a thumbs up. Yeah. It's what happens with multiple losses. It's a bit like playing Whack-A-Mole. So you'll be grieving. So for example, Chantal, are you happy for me to use you as an example? Is that okay? Yeah, because just say if it's not. So Chantal, you've lost Chantal. So you'll be grieving for Chantal and then your husband will pop in. Yeah. What about me? And then you'll be going to the dog, your dog. What about me? And so it's like, what about me? What about me? Whack-a-mole. Yeah. Your mind is everywhere. And so it's not possible to heal in that state. What needs to happen is you need to give dedicated time to each loss. And when the other one comes knocking on the door, what about me? What about me? What about me? Oh, honey, I'm just with Chantal at the moment. I'll come to you tomorrow. Does that make sense? One at a time. Yeah. Think of it like when you're face to face, when you're seeing a friend, when you go out on a date. Yeah. You're not talking to lots of different people. You're talking to that person. You're not sitting at the table and texting and talking to someone else. It's like, no, you put the phone aside. So when someone knocks on the door and that grief comes up, you literally have to compartmentalize it, park it and say, no, I'll come to you later. I'm with such and such now. So that's the best strategy. And grief's very organic. So the grief will tell you where to go. What about? Stick with one, hold one, and allow one to process. Yeah. Now, when I say allow it to process, it could be just 5 minutes. It could be put on a song and dance your heart out and grieve that particular person or that loss. And then you might switch and you might go and write someone else a letter, but one at a time. It's like visiting friends. Yeah. Can I talk to you next Thursday? You can have a movie night. It can be 5 minutes. It can be a whole day. You can go visit their favorite spot, like whatever works for you. So now I'm going to move on and talk. Was that useful? Yeah. I'm going to talk about the grief timeline now. So the thing about the grief timeline, this is a quote from the Grief Recovery Handbook that I quite like. And the quote is the concept that time heals is probably responsible for more heartache than any other single wrong idea in our society. And the terrible part is it's not true. I want you to think about that for a moment. The concept that time heals is probably responsible for more heartache than any other single wrong idea in our society, and it's not even true. It's a falsehood that's been passed down from generation to generation. There is no timeline in grief because no two people will experience grief the same way. We are all different. We all grieve differently. And time doesn't heal. It's what you do with that time that matters. Time doesn't heal. So I'm going to share some stages of grief. Now, I'm saying on one breath, I'm saying time doesn't heal. And the other breath, I'm saying there are different stages of grief. Now, this is important because what happens is our grief does change over time. It kind of goes through different stages. You can't put specific time. It's not like 6 months here and 3 months there and a year there. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't, right? But what happens, anticipatory grief is the grief that we have before the loss happens. So if somebody has a diagnosis, if our dog is not well, something like that. And so the reason these different stages are useful from a professional perspective, and I know there's a couple professionals in the room, is that it helps us gauge the interventions. So for example, if someone feels a lot of guilt and they're 3 months in, of course, I would just witness that. I would explore it. I wouldn't be trying to change it. It's too early. But if someone is experiencing a lot of guilt 2-3 years in, that's a different, from a professional perspective and a healing perspective, it's a different conversation. And so the anticipated grief is the first stage before the death or the loss happens. Then acute grief is when it's just happened. And that acute grief can last, I would say I was in acute grief for 9 months, and I would say I moved through pretty quick. I was doing so much work, but I would say, yeah, I was in it for a long time. And that's when it's too much. It's like everything, it's pure survival. So that's that sort of early acute grief is really, really tough. It's when you're in the depths of the worst pain, pure survival. The next stage is early grief. So, this is the first couple of years. It says first 2 on there. It's the first couple of years. It's when it's not pure survival. We're learning to live again. We begin to learn to live again. It begins to feel possible. We begin to have joyous moments without feeling grief. It does get a little bit easier. It's not as heavy. And then what happens is the grief begins to mature. And that's kind of the stage that you'll live with for the rest of your life. The grief is going to change over time. It will grow, it will mature, it will move, it will be different. So the intensity, the frequency of those triggers will lessen. But you can still have a really significant trigger 10 years in, like the triggers can come back. So the grief will surface sometimes just as strongly. Sometimes it comes up. I notice now for me, so I call it love bubbles. I just miss Aaron and it feels more like love than pain. That's what I kind of see the grief journey. It's kind of like moving through the pain towards the love. So that as it comes up, it feels more like love than it feels like a traumatic loss. It kind of, I'm finding as my grief is beginning to mature, it's kind of moving more into that love sort of stage, which is nice. Now, this is a model of grief that really resonated with me. There's many different models out there. It's called the Tompkins model of grief. And it's a demonstration. It just shows how the size of our grief doesn't change over time. What happens is we learn to grow our lives around grief. And it kind of reinforces my point about how time doesn't heal. It's what we do with that time that counts. And so I've come up with this model, which I really love, with the wishing wells. It's just a bit of a metaphor. Now, this wishing well, imagine this is the early acute phase of grief, survival stage, right? Now, in the beginning, all there is your grief. The well is your grief. Yeah. So the well in this model represents your grief. The water in the well represents our emotions. And so in acute early grief, what happens is we are absolutely consumed. It is just the well. There's nothing else. It's in a barren, empty landscape. The grief is everything. It is all consuming. That's acute grief. Then over time, as we move into early grief, we learn to fill and pull up the bucket of water. Yeah. So we learn ways to feel our emotions. We learn ways to connect back with ourselves. We learn how to express ourselves, and we learn how to cope in this new life that we have to create. Yeah. And basically what happens is we are emptying the bucket. Remember, the water is our emotions. We're emptying out the bucket and we're watering the garden. We're learning to tend to our grief. It's like we're tending to the garden. We're watering the garden. Then as our grief matures, if we are tending to our grief in a healthy way, we will create a beautiful garden. Yeah. Eventually and over time, the garden is our life. The garden is the life we build around our grief. Now, the key here is that the grief doesn't disappear. The grief is still there. So you might imagine as time goes on, you've got a beautiful landscape to garden, yeah, with a wishing well in the middle. Now, the size of that well hasn't changed. The grief is still there. It's a significant loss. The grief is still there. But around the well, you've built a life. And you can totally build a beautiful life around your loss, around your grief. It is possible. If you're not tending to your garden, if you're not tending to your emotions, if you're not feeling your emotions, if you're not learning how to express them in healthy, resourceful ways, if you're suppressing them, avoiding them, numbing them, drinking drugs, like push it down, don't want to feel, what happens is it gets stuck inside. You will get stuck in a barren landscape. You will stay in the suffering. You will stay in the guilt. You will stay in the shame. You'll stay in the stories. Yeah, your grief will still be there, but it'll be disproportionately there to your potential and to your capacity to live a really good life, despite your loss. Oops. So the life around your grief, it just won't flourish. If you're not doing this healthy emotional release work, if you're not feeling what you need to feel, learning ways to connect with your loss and honoring your loved one, the garden can't grow. The plants won't grow. Yeah. So it's really unhealthy. If your life doesn't grow around your loss and you're not watering the garden, not tending to the garden, it just can't grow. So I think that's a really sort of useful metaphor for describing grief. You can see that the wishing well, the size doesn't change. Life continues to go on whether we deal with our emotions, whether we tend to our garden or not. Life will continue. Which is the point. Time doesn't heal. It's what we do with the time that counts. So just remember, your grief doesn't change over time. It's what you do with your grief. It's what you do with your healing work that makes the difference. Yeah. So that's the Tompkins model of grief. Now I'm going to flip now and share some tips for acute and early grief. Are you all still with me? How are you going? Let me know how you're going in the chat box. How are we going for time? If anyone's got a burning question, I'm happy to take it. I'll just give you a moment. Or if anyone wants to come off mute and ask me a question, you can do that too. I'm going to keep talking. And if a question, okay, I'm okay, just feeling down. Yeah. All right, I'm going to keep going. So just if you're still typing, that's fine. Just keep typing. So some tips for early and acute grief. So this is when the grief has just happened, really the first year. So coming to a grief masterclass, it helps because you'll learn strategies, you'll pick up something new, your grief fog brain. It's like baby brain. For those of you that have brave baby, you know what I'm talking about. It's just foggy. It's just hard to even think. It can be hard to concentrate. It can be hard to apply yourself. So, you know, you'll learn a lot today. That's why I say take notes, take notes, take notes. Joining grief support groups helps. David Kessler runs a phenomenal grief support group called Tender Hearts. If you haven't heard of that, you might want to look it up. I don't know if it's the largest online grief support group in the world, but I would hazard a guess to say it is, because there's hundreds and hundreds of people in there. That's where I went in my loss, because remember, we were in COVID. Nothing was open. I couldn't go to the normal support networks. Working with a healer helps. Working with a grief coach helps. You know, there's lots of different resources that you can access. So this is all about engaging with your grief. You know, your grief, this is what I like to say, your grief needs to be wrestled with. Yeah, we need to wrestle with it. And the reason we need to wrestle with it is because you don't want to just become a victim of your loss. We're so much more than that. You're so much more than that. So, you know, my work is very much about helping people to be courageous. Be a courageous griever. Yeah. So here are my tips. I can't remember, 10. This says there's 10. All right. 10 tips. So ask and accept help. In those early stages, it's like drop-offs, pickups, groceries, cooking, cleaning. When it's all too much, you've got to delegate. People want to help you. They don't know how. They don't know what you need. Only you know what you need. Yeah. Thanks, Luke. So even just sitting with you, if you don't want to be alone, not to fix you, not to make you feel better. One of my gorgeous girlfriends, Karen, used to be, oh, I can't wait till we can go dancing. I just want to take you out dancing and for a drink. And I just look at her and go, I couldn't think of anything worse. I couldn't think, I do not want to dance. My body, are you kidding me right now? But she just wanted to help. You know, she wanted me to feel happy again, because that's what we do. We live in this society of toxic positivity and bright sizing. Well, at least, you know, this, or you can get another dog. No, I don't want another dog. I want that dog, you know? So there's so many ways. So asking for what you need is really powerful, and it's okay. The thing is a lot of us don't know how to ask for help. So this is a muscle you might need to develop. If you're getting a lot of emotion in your throat, it means you're not speaking your truth. You need to learn how to find your voice. Yeah. Drink lots of water. The shock and tears will absolutely dehydrate you. I know for me and my daughter Adele, we were so dehydrated, which led to digestive and other issues, right? But the thing is because we were in shock, we couldn't remember to drink. I knew I needed to drink water. I knew I was dehydrated, but I couldn't even remember to drink. It's not enough to tell someone to drink lots of water. Like, you need to find ways to remind yourself to drink. We actually got Adele's friends online on Snapchat, and I got Snapchat, and they would send us photos of them drinking and photos of their glasses and just random. We'd get about 8 photos a day, and every time a Snapchat came in with an image of water, oh, right, okay, I'd have to stop and go and get a drink. Now, they did that for about 5 weeks for us, until I actually said, oh, Harry, one of her friends, was absolute absolute diamond at it. And I remember messaging him about 8 weeks later saying, oh, I'm okay now, but I just needed that help to get through. And that was a really good way to involve other people as well, because all of my daughter's friends were grieving as well. You know, they knew, Aaron, this is the challenge. In loss, everyone around you can be grieving as well. So they were very happy to help us. But please remember to drink lots of water. Even if you don't feel like it, you will, you know, you do get dehydrated. The other thing about water is water actually helps. Our body needs water to send messages through. So the messages that move through our body, water is like a lubricant that allows those messages to transmute through the body. So we need to stay hydrated. Another tip, and I know this is common sense, but once again, in grief, sense goes out the door. When you are in a debilitating loss, sense goes out the door. You need to eat healthy foods. Some people will binge eat, some people will lose their appetite. So this is about focusing on nourishing foods and superfoods. Really focus on what you're putting into your mouth. Yeah. So severe eating order is often a lack of control. So when it comes to the eating, that's something that you feel you can control. When your world is out of control, you can control what you put in. Yeah. I remember being so out of it. I lost 5 kilograms in that first week that Aaron died. I remember forcing myself to eat bananas because I knew I needed strength. And it was literally just dropping off me. So please focus on eating healthy foods. Tip 4, have healthy boundaries around visitors. So this kind of goes with accept and ask for help. In early loss, remember this is acute and early grief. There's different tips for mature grief, yeah? There's a lot of noise when the loss happens, a lot of noise. People rush in from everywhere. People want to help. I didn't have a lot of noise because it was COVID and we were in a pandemic and the world just stopped. But typically, people will be wanting to help you. There's a lot of noise. One of my girlfriends lost her 13-year-old daughter 3 weeks after Aaron. She died in her sleep. And I remember working with her and she was telling me how she had one of the daughter's school friends' mums would just show up unannounced, trying to help. And then the next minute, my friend was supporting her. So it was becoming a drain on her energy. And so this is about having people around you that are actually helping you. So in our society, I would say, you know, so many of us are people pleasers. 80% of us would be people pleasers. And so we don't like to say no. We feel bad. We feel like we need to be accommodating. People in early loss, you'll get so many messages, so many phone messages, so many text messages, and you don't have to reply to them all. You don't have to reply. If you haven't got the energy, don't respond. I remember getting so many energy messages. I just didn't have, I didn't have the motivation or the energy to be connecting and engaging in all these conversations because it's draining. But everyone's so worried about you. Everyone wants to know you're okay. So what I did was every now and again, I'd come up for air. I'd just send love hearts. Thank you. Thank you. And I only engaged about 5 of my friends, 4 or 5 of my close friends. That's who I talked to. And I kept my group very small because I just didn't have the energy. So it is important to have healthy boundaries around your visitors. Remember, no is a complete sentence. You need every ounce of your energy that you can muster. Don't waste it on people that aren't actually supporting you, even though they want to. If they're not, you need to cull. You need to build your boundaries around that. Another tip is to focus on micro moments. If your grief is really overwhelming and you're struggling, especially if you're struggling to breathe, because the thing is in grief, we breathe very shallowy. Shallowy, is that a word? Shallow. Very shallow. It can be hard to breathe. That's breathless is a very common thing that people will say when they're in that early stages of loss. In trauma, our brain literally fragments into pieces. That's what trauma is. It's a heightened emotional response that's beyond our capacity to process. That's what trauma is in a simpler form, right? And so in traumatic loss, in that trauma, when the body's in shock and everything, focusing on these micro moments is really powerful. And please pop in the chat box if you've got any ideas. I'm going to share some ways that you can I'm going to give you some examples, but pop in the chat box ways that you focus on micro moments. So for me, focusing on micro moments, I would typically go outside and I literally appreciate the petals of a flower. I'll notice that they're bright orange. Yeah. I might stop and just watch the leaves swaying in the breeze, or listen to the birds chirping, or watch a bee frolicking, collecting nectar. Breathe, just notice my breath, breathing in, feeling the breath go into my stomach. That's what I mean by micro moments. Take off your shoes, feel the ground under your feet. If you're by the ocean, the waves are incredibly soothing. Watch the waves just rolling. Feel the sand on your feet. Yeah. Now, the reason this stuff's so powerful is because it reminds you that you're alive and that you're living. It slows you down and it grounds you. So when it's all too much and your brain is just shot, focus on those micro moments. So really just slow it down and just focus on little things. The sun on your cheek. Yeah. Did anyone have any others? Just pop them in, share them. I'm going to keep going, but I'd love to hear them. I love to make sense of random. Yeah. Yeah. Watch the clouds. Absolutely. Moving your body is essential. Absolutely essential. Stretch, exercise, movement, it shifts the energy in your body. Yeah. Emotion needs motion. It needs motion to move. Yeah. Now, I want to say here, especially if you don't feel like it. Especially if you don't feel like it. I remember forcing myself to go for a bike ride. I didn't want to go. I didn't have the energy. All the excuses coming up. I forced myself to go for a bike ride. I cannot tell you how much better I felt afterwards. It actually lifted the heaviness on my chest and it cleared it and I was able to breathe. Now, riding for me, riding my bike is a trigger. Because what would happen, I'd ride my bike, I felt alive, and it reminded me that my son was dead. That's how simple the triggers can be. When I felt alive, it reminded me, it triggered me. So riding my bike was a trigger. But when I went, and so often I'd wear like sunglasses so no one could see me, and you'd have the helmet on. And I got to the point where I would just ride and just cry. And it was just a way to help me move the emotion, move the energy. And I always felt so much better afterwards. So dancing's really powerful. Throw on the music. If you're angry, throw on your anger music and be angry. But the trick here is to feel the anger in your body. Feel the sadness in your body. Running, punching bag, but feel, it's not about getting it out. It's feeling the emotion in the body. So feel the grief as you move. Connect with the sadness. Yoga, just really feel it. Paul Denniston, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's what is it? It's griefyoga.com, I think. Grief yoga. He does grief yoga. So you don't even need to be physical, but you can feel the emotion. He does yoga with the emotion, which is really cool stuff. Yes, reach out for support. So talk to people who understand grief. That's why being in grief support groups and talking to people really helps. When you connect with people who have had similar experiences, it can because it's like no one can understand your loss. But when you talk to other people who have had a similar loss that are a similar age, it helps. It actually helps to talk about it, to be with people who get it, where you don't have to pretend you're okay. Because here's the thing, in the normal world, people want to know we're okay. I felt like I was in a fishbowl. Everyone needed to know I was okay. Yeah. So being around people where it's okay not to be okay is actually pretty cool. I always frequently get calls from people who are recently bereaved, people who I don't know. I share my knowledge, I share my experience, I normalize their grief. I tell them, of course, you feel that way, that's normal. And they're so relieved. Yeah, it really, really helps. And often I don't even need to do a healing and it helps. They feel heaps better. So, I know in the early stages for me, I spoke with a lady called Zenith Virago. She runs the Natural Death Care Centre here in Byron Bay in Australia. And she's very experienced with death and grief. She's what they call a death walker. She helps people pass. It's beautiful. But she really understood the magnitude of what I was experiencing. She was able to ask questions. She would ask me questions and she was able to point me in a number of different resources and different strategies and ways to deal with different things. So she guided me a lot. In fact, some of these tips are tips that, and some of my videos are tips that she shared with me because I found them really useful. Also, get professional support. But if you're reaching out for professional support, you do need to, and I've emphasized this earlier, but you do need to make sure that they are grief informed and that they're experienced. I cannot tell you the amount of people I've worked with that tell me, I've been to a psychiatrist, I've been to the psychologist, I've done the counseling, I've done the therapy, and it didn't work. Now, it's not because those practices are no good. They absolutely are. Like anything, there are good psychiatrists, there are good psychologists, there are good counselors, there are good therapists, of course. But it's getting the right one for you and making sure that they understand loss. Because a lot don't. Yeah. I know when I was looking for someone to work with, I spent a couple of days. It was a research project for me. It's very serious about it because it was my life. So if I was going to spend my time getting therapy and getting support, I wanted to make sure it was going to be the right support. So in Australia, we have a fantastic Medicare system where we get free visits to psychologists, right? Or, very highly subsidized. So if anyone is going to see a psychologist, make sure they're somatic trained. So the somatic style of practice is works with the body, with the mind, with the emotions, with the thoughts. It works with all the different, with the physical body. So somatic practices are very good in the grief space. You just got to ask around. Make sure they're grief informed, make sure they understand grief. And to really drive this message home, it's like you wouldn't go to a podiatrist if you had a sore tooth. So if you're going to get support and professional help for grief, you need to make sure they understand grief. Just because they're a practitioner doesn't mean they understand this world. Yeah. So it's very, very important. Also, feel what you need to feel. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about emotions at the end of the training today. As I said, I'll be taking you through a self-directed healing process where we'll be able to expel some of that emotion that's in your body now. So you need to learn how to feel. Also, I've talked about joining a grief support group. There are many grief support groups out there. They all have their own cultures. This is about finding the right group. Yeah, because there's a sense of kinship in that. Most grief support groups are pretty basic. This is why you need to do your homework. Most of them are pretty basic. So you'll go in, they'll have a moderator and you'll talk about how you're feeling. Now, there's a lot of value in that. Having your grief witnessed is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do in the beginning. Yeah. But typically in these grief support groups, there is no education, no coaching, no activities. Like it's not structured towards healing and it's not structured towards future and living your best life. So that's why, it's literally about witnessing your pain. So once again, incredibly powerful, very helpful, but for many, it's not enough. So just make sure when you're looking for a grief support group, that it's going to be a group that fits what you're looking for. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about tips for Christmas and special occasions. We've got Christmas coming up. Does anyone need like a 1 or 2 minute stretch break? Anyone need to duck to the loo, grab a water? Or shall I just keep going? No, looks like we're all good. Okay. I'm going to keep going then. When it comes to special occasions, like when you lose someone that you love, days like Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, days that were joyous and celebrated, they're now a trigger for our loss because they're a reminder that our loved one isn't with us. They are a slap on the face of how different our life now is. Absolute slap on the face. And they're also a stark reminder of that life continues to go on without them. Yeah. And it's a huge problem for grievers because these joyful days, these events, these lovely momentous occasions that were often celebrated, grievers will often withdraw from because they'll often fear and dread them in advance because they know it's going to trigger the loss and they don't want to lose it. They don't want to trigger the pain. And so this sense of dread, this worry, this can start weeks in advance. I know for me, it started about 6 weeks before that first Christmas, but I had Aaron's birthday as well. I had Aaron's birthday, New Year's, Christmas, my birthday, my daughter's birthday. It was just this kaleidoscope of events that I had to work my way through. And, but this sense of them not being there, it just triggers our pain, it triggers our loss, it triggers how much it hurts, and it triggers how much we miss them. So there's a lot of stuff that happens on these occasions. So this part of the training is really about how can we show up on those days, how can we honor ourselves, but also how can we bring our loved one with us and honor them on those occasions as well. So, my work is very much forward focused. Yes, I do the healing and everything, but my work is about, it's helping people to live their best life despite the challenges that get thrown on our pathway. How can we still how can we empower ourselves? How can we still tap into our potential and really live a great life? So, in the way that's best for you, however you define success, because it's different for everybody. Yeah. So Christmas, special occasions, there's usually an expectation that will show up. Yeah. That will contribute, that will be happy, because that's the way we've always done it. It's the way we've always done it. So there is an expectation, but I would really like you all to understand that we have free will. You have free will. You might decide it's too hard. You don't want to participate. And you know what? That's okay. And guess what? You can cancel Christmas. You can cancel Christmas. It'll be there next year. Like, you've got to look after yourself first, do what you need to do. So it's also really helpful that if you decide it's too hard to be okay, let that be okay. It's about removing expectations of how you should show up. Because here's the thing, you'll have expectations about the day. Because you'll be worried in advance, right? And so you might fear the day, and then the day comes up and you might be fine. And all that worry was for nothing. You might fear the day and you might be totally overwhelmed on the day. Like, you don't know which way it's going to go, because grief is very organic. You may spend the day swinging between happy, angry, sad, So when you remove those expectations of how you should be, it allows you just to be. If you turn up and you're emotional, you have a meltdown, so be it. Let that be okay. If you want to leave, that's okay. If you want to talk, if you want to honor your loved one, just be open to it. Yeah. If you don't want to talk, then don't. It's all normal. It's all normal. There's no right, there's no wrong way here. It's all normal, because in grief, our emotions will swing and they are very, very unpredictable. They're like waves. I love the waves metaphor. They peak, they trough, they disperse onto the sand. Emotions are like waves, yeah? At the end of the day, there is absolutely no way that we're ever forgetting them. So the key here is to come up with ways to include our grief in the occasion with no apologies. How can you include your grief? You can't leave it behind. You can't, it's not a tap that you can switch off. And if you are switching it off, that's unhealthy. If you are burying and suppressing your emotions, that's unhealthy. Now, I do need to say, there are times when it's appropriate and not appropriate, right? To have a meltdown. If you're at work, if you can hold it till you get home, that's going to be better. Yeah. If you need to go off to the toilet to regain your composure, so be it. Yeah. But this is about learning healthy, resourceful ways to show up. No apologies. On special occasions, it's very useful to have an exit strategy. Yeah. Beforehand. Think about this before you go anywhere, before you arrive. Yeah. What are you going to do if you need to leave? Because you might be okay, and then all of a sudden you might get triggered and you might feel trapped. So you got to have a plan. Plan in advance. Set yourself up for success. You can turn up and you can say, oh, look, I'm only going to stay for a short while. And then if you stay longer, it's a bonus. They'll be surprised. Yeah. And remember, no is a complete sentence. When people invite you over, you don't have to explain yourself. If you don't want to go, you can say, no, thank you. If you find yourself going into explanations, that's your guilt coming up, and that's your people pleaser coming up. Save your energy. No, thank you. And then they might push back, oh, but we hate the idea of you being alone. I understand. No, thank you. Yeah. And then they might, oh, but it's what your loved one would want. They wouldn't want you to be alone. They'd want us to be together. No, thank you. Not this time. That's it. No is a complete sentence. So you can empower yourself. Give your grief some time beforehand. Yeah. In the weeks preceding my son's birthday, I spend a lot of time working on my grief. I feel my body. Because I do energy healing, I'm very tuned in with my body now. This is a process. Your body gets better at it. It's like a skill that you learn going to the gym, right? Emotional healing. I feel my grief coming up. I feel it building in my body. And so I work on my grief before a special occasion. I'll do photos, I do videos, I cry when I want to cry, I get very reflective, I book in for healings, I just do whatever I need to do. I go for walks, I get out in nature, I do self-directed healing sessions. When you're processing and working your grief, it helps you to be stronger and helps you to show up on the day. Yeah. It's all about setting yourself up, for success. So plan ahead. If your spouse has died, what are you going to do on Valentine's Day? What are you going to do on their birthday? What are you going to do on your anniversary? Yeah. And it might be that you need to just call a friend and organize to do something so that you're not alone. I know on Mother's Day, I started talking with my mum, with my daughter, weeks in advance. That first Mother's Day, we went backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, trying to plan something that we were all comfortable with, that we were happy with. And we ended up going to a historical homestead, and it was magic. It was actually it was quite pleasant, and what it did was because it was an hour drive each way and it filled the afternoon, it ended up being an okay day because I planned in advance. And so this is about surrounding yourself with people that you love, surrounding yourself with people that you're comfortable with, doing things that you enjoy. Yeah. Now on Aaron's second birthday, I didn't plan in advance because I thought I was okay. I didn't actually think about it. I had a tribute going that night, and I woke up that morning and I was devastated. And I had nothing to do and I was alone. And I remember crying. I remember, actually, my daughter came in. I remember crying and going, I didn't set myself up for success. Such a coachy thing to say, right? But I realized I'd failed myself because I hadn't set myself up for success. I hadn't planned the day. I'd planned the evening, but not the day. And so this is about really thinking, what are you doing on Christmas Day, guys? Have you filled your day? Fill your day. And it doesn't have to be with people, but just with things that you enjoy. Have a plan. Yeah, you've got to plan in advance. You've got to set yourself up for success. No one else can do this for you. Yeah. Surround yourself with love. Now, I love to find ways to honor Aaron, and for any griever, to honor any loss. Yeah. And then, so I'm just going to share a heap. You might want to get your phones out, because I'm just going to share a heap of tips, and I'll tell you when I get to the last one. You can just take a photo, save your writing. So you can visit the gravesite or the accident site. You can look at photos. You can share photos. You can create videos. You can donate to a cause. You can pray for them. You can set an extra place at the table. That's the end of that slide if you want a photo. You got it? All right. You can also light a candle. You can share stories about them. I love talking about Aaron. You can create a ritual that includes them. You can I have photo frames everywhere. I didn't have photos around the house, but now I have photos everywhere. So you can have photos out. And some people like to get gifts. Sometimes, like, I've bought my daughter gifts, mum's bought me gifts from Aaron. So you'll be in a shop and you'll get inspired, and yeah, we'll just buy gifts for each other. Sometimes it's quite nice. So that's the end of that slide if you want to take that photo. Okay, other ways that you can honor them is meals. You can cook their favorite thing. So you might decide to cook their favorite meals as a way to honor them. Yeah. You might decide that a traditional Christmas, Thanksgiving feast is too hard. If you don't, like I said, grief is exhausting. And so having a traditional meal can be a lot. And can I say, I would not recommend hosting. I would not recommend hosting if you're in deep grief, unless you need to, but you've got to make sure you get support. You've got to get support, right? So it doesn't have to be a traditional meal. You can have something frozen. You can, like, seriously, you can have whatever you want. You can have chicken nuggets. It doesn't matter. You create the rules. Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean it always has to be done that way. Doesn't mean you can take a break. It doesn't mean you can't have a year off. You can go back to your rules if you like your traditions, yeah? But you set the rules. So just do something, and you can make that quite fun. Oh, we're just going to do this, and just be a bit silly with it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So these days, like, I have Aaron's favorite meal was spaghetti bolognese. And so I'll have I call them spag bowl nights, and I invite Aaron's friends around. I'm going to start doing family ones, and they're nights where we all come together. It's a really great way to bring together people. And we do it around Aaron's food. I have tribute events, and we cook sausage sizzles, because Aaron used to sneak out, I didn't know this, in the middle of the night and cook sausages down at the local park on the barbecues. So it's a bit of a joke. We have sausage sizzles, and all his mates, they get it. It's fun. So you can create your own little new rituals. I want to talk about families for a moment, because grief in families is complex. And the reason it's complex, and I said this already, is because everyone grieves differently. Now, when it comes to problems in relationships around grief and loss, usually that arises not because somebody's died, but because we're judging each other's grief. because we're judging each other's grief. They're too emotional. They're just angry. They're shut off. They won't talk to me. They're not grieving at all. They don't care. They're not listening. They don't get me, whatever it is, yeah? You might find that one family member, that some family members desperately need to come together. And then you might have other family members that just don't, because that triggers them. It's really complex. So this is about exploring ways to honor every person in their grief. And the key here is communication. It's the only way. It's the only way. Yeah, it's communication. You might find some family members want to put the Christmas tree up and others don't. I had that very experience. My daughter wanted to put the tree up and I just couldn't. The tree triggered me because it was something we did together. Aaron, Adele and I used to put the tree up together. And so putting up the Christmas tree triggered me. But Adele wanted to put the tree up. So I had to find a way to put the tree up and to honor her, because she needed to have the tree up. And so this is all about communication. So expressing what you need is really empowering. Yeah, it's about learning what everyone needs and exploring ways to honor every person in their grief, because we need to listen to everyone. We need to discuss, we need to be open, we need to find pathways that work for everyone. This is where you need to, sometimes it means you need to create new traditions and new rituals and work around everyone. You create the rules. Yeah. If you need to create new rules, create new rules. It's a great opportunity to do that. So be open to finding a pathway that works for everybody. Now, when it comes to grief, you have to remember to include the children, because children are often they're called the forgotten grievers. They often get left behind. I'm working with a client at the moment who is in her 50s, and when she was a girl, her brother died, and she's realizing the impact of that loss is actually affecting her relationships now, because her view of the world is different. Her expectations and her view of the world's different. So her grief never had space back then. It's never too late. When that grief surfaces, it can be 4 decades later. It doesn't matter. It's never too late to do the work. So that's Christmas. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about New Year's. So when it comes to New Year's, I mentioned at the beginning that New Year's is one of the toughest days in the year for grievers. Now, I didn't realize this, and I remember that first New Year's, it was so challenging, but I didn't actually understand why. I was so emotional, more than usual. My grief was heavy, like it was really hard. I felt so triggered, but I didn't understand why. Now, at the time I was in David Kessler's Tender Hearts group, and he came on and he spoke about New Year's grief, and it made so much sense, right? He explained how New Year's is one of the toughest days for grievers. And so it helped me so much that I'm sharing this information now. So yeah, it really did make a difference for me. So when it comes to New Year's is traditionally a time for new beginnings. It's a time for celebrations. It's a time we come together where we make wishes, we make resolutions, and we're very much focused on the future, moving into the new year. Yeah. And so through this part of the masterclass, I just want to encourage you to think about this a little bit differently. So when it comes to New Year's, most people are celebrating because it's a time for new beginnings. Yeah, it's a time we make those wishes. It's a time we make those resolutions for the coming year. We get excited, and we use that excitement and that opportunity often to motivate us into change. Yeah. And New Year's is tough, especially because what happens is, as you're moving into the new year and you're looking forward, there's a sense that we're saying goodbye to the previous year. And it feels like, for a griever, it feels like we're moving further away from our loved one. I want this to land. As we move into the new year, it feels like we're moving further away from our loved one. Yeah. And we're moving into the new year without them, which is not what we want. And so that intensifies our feelings of grief and separation. It feels like we're leaving them behind and we're moving on without them. Now, what's important to understand here is that we're moving away from the date they died. We're not moving away from them. We don't have to move away from them. So we can learn to look at this differently so that New Year's becomes a time where we include our grief and we show our love to those who are no longer here with us. That's what this is about. It's about learning to include your grief in the occasion. So New Year's is a day that we give meaning. And what that means is it means that we can choose to shift the meaning. We can choose to shift the meaning, to include our loved one and bring them with us. When I learned this, it was a game changer for me. All of a sudden, all that energy that I was feeling and triggers and emotions, they left. Because it's like, oh, okay. So then I became excited about how could I bring Aaron with me into the new year? Is this landing? Yeah. So understand, New Year's is literally just another day on the calendar. It's a day that we give meaning. So we can choose to create our own meaning with this. Yeah. We can choose to bring them with us. We can choose to continue creating meaning, continuing to honor their lives. We can bring them even closer into our hearts. So think of it like you're moving further away from the tragedy of their death. Write this down. You're moving further away from the tragedy of their death, but you're bringing them with you. You're not moving further away from them. And so this is about considering, how can I create even more connections with them? How can I create even more connections with them? What's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? What actions can you do? It will help this transition. You can send them a wish. At midnight, I did this. Everyone's doing the Happy New Year and everything. And I stopped and paused and spoke to Aaron. I took time for Aaron. I included him in New Year's. Yeah. So you can take time to wish your loved one a new year. You can spend a moment in connection, sending them a blessing, sending them a prayer. And it doesn't have to be at midnight. You create the rules. It's your rule book. Yeah. So what part of your grief, this is a really good question. What part of your grief would you like to leave behind? That's a good question. What part of your grief would you like to leave behind in the old year? And what would you like to bring with you? And or create more room for in the coming year? It's powerful, powerful stuff. These little tweaks make a massive, massive difference. I can see you writing. Have you all got that? Before I move on. Yeah. All right. So it can feel like we have to say goodbye, but ask yourself, is it really helpful for my loved one to remain absent in my life? It's not helpful. It's just not. And so this is about really looking for ways to incorporate them into your life, remembering that grief is love. No one can take your love away from you. Nobody has the power to do that, especially a day in the calendar. Yeah. And New Year's is no different. So I'm always looking for ways to incorporate my son into my life. So this is about looking after yourself. This is about being kind to yourself. And if you're struggling, to reach out for support. Reach out for support. That's what people like myself are here for. There are many of us that do this work. So that's my New Year's information. I trust that's useful. I'm going to move on now and talk about supporting people in grief. So I'm switching from being the griever to supporting people in grief. So what happens when it comes to supporting people in grief? Basically, we really suck at it. We're not taught how to support people in grief. We don't know how to do it. And often, because it's outside of our comfort zone, people in grief often make other people uncomfortable. I know that my grief makes people uncomfortable. I know that there are people out there that go, oh God, when's she going to stop talking about grief? Never. It makes people uncomfortable because they don't understand it. They don't know how to support me. It is outside their comfort zone. That's their stuff. That's their stuff. Yeah. So when we talk about grief support is about meeting people where they are. It's listening. It's sitting in the silence. There's so much power in the pause. Judith, can I say you're doing really well? Is it 3 a.m. now? You're doing really well. When I run the practitioner training, sometimes we have people coming in from all over the world, and yeah, they start in the middle of the night and I'm like, come on, wake up. So grief support is about meeting people where they are, wherever they are. Remembering there's no right or wrong way to grieve. We're all different. It's meeting them where they are. It's listening. It's sitting in the silence. There is so much power in the pause. But what happens is we talk because we're uncomfortable in the silence. I can't tell you how many people would send me, I get a text message. How are you? I don't know. I didn't even know how to answer that question. Your grief brain takes time to process. Yeah. And then what happens is they're talking and the conversation's moved on and I haven't even answered the question. I don't even know how I am. How do I even answer that? I don't know. Because it's very hard to articulate. And then the conversation's moved on. It needs some space. How are you? How are you feeling today? And give them time to actually answer. Let the conversation breathe. Yeah, power in the pause. So supporting people in grief is all about witnessing their pain, like literally witnessing their pain. That's how we support. It's sitting with them in the depths, not trying to fix them. They're not broken. It's just sitting with them in the depths, sitting with them in the trenches. It's just being there. Yeah. Now, the best thing that you can say to a griever is, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling today? This is important. Not how are you? How are you feeling today? Because every day is different. And if you ask someone how they're feeling and they tell you they're doing okay, don't just check out and go, oh, they're all right. Because you know what? Tomorrow they might not be okay. Because grief will peak and trough. I say to people who are supporting those grieving, put reminders in your calendar. Yeah. Put in anniversary dates, but don't just message them on the day of the anniversary or the birthday. Message them a week before to see if they need any support. I get a lot of messages on the special days, probably because I'm on social media and I'm very vocal about my boy. But I don't have a lot of time on the day. I'm busy on the day because I've planned the day in advance. But if I get a call a couple of days later saying, how was it? Or a couple of days earlier, that's gold. That's absolute gold. That's what I need. So how are you feeling today? And then give them time to respond. And ask yourself, this is a good question. How can I sit with them? How can I be the one person who's making them feel that they're doing it right? How can I be the one person that's making them feel they're doing it right? Because I tell you what, they'll be judging their own grief. Other people will be judging them. It's not about having the right thing to say. You don't need to fix anything. You don't need answers. You don't need solutions. They're not broken. Grief is a very normal response to loss. And so supporting people in grief is very much about showing them you care enough to have the conversation. Don't worry about reminding them or triggering them. Seriously, if anyone thinks that someone has forgotten about their grief, I assure you they haven't forgotten. They haven't forgotten. If you knew their person, share stories, say what you miss, normalize the conversation. I will often ask, what's their name? I did that with Katrina. What's your daughter's name? Yeah, normalize the conversation. And I'll often say when I have time, can you tell me something you love about them? And it's beautiful. They connect with that part, not the loss, the tragedy, but the love part. So that can be really nice. Can you tell me something you love about them? You didn't have to know their person. Lots of people lots of people now feel that they know Aaron because I've spoken about him so much. So now I'm going to talk about the emotions of grief, and then we're going to move into the group healing. So the emotions of grief this is about really feeling that there's so many different ways that grief can be expressed in the body. So it can go from trauma, grief, despair, anger, shock and numbness, disconnection, sadness, depression, relief, right through to inspiration. There are so many different emotions in grief, and they can literally be like a pendulum swinging, like literally a pendulum swinging. You can be in joy, you can be in trauma, you can be in glad, sad, numb, shock, anger, all over the place. Like, this is how messy it can be. It is not linear. Grief is not a state. It's not a linear process. It can be all over the place. It is very messy. That is normal. So I like to think of it a bit like a really crazy random roller coaster, right? All over the place. Now, we are living in a society that has learnt to numb and avoid pain. Literally, we don't know how to process our emotions. So here in Australia, we have the second highest rate in the world for prescribing for depression and anxiety. Second highest rate in the world. Now, seriously, that's just making a mock out of grief and trauma. That's not okay. Now, please don't get me wrong. There are absolutely times when medication is necessary. That is not my message. My message is that we live, the medical model of the world that we live in typically goes to medication before it even goes to learning how to feel your emotions. Think about it. Boys don't cry. You're too emotional. Anger and sadness are often regarded as negative and unwelcome emotions, and yet they're very healthy emotions. It comes down to how we express them. Yeah. And too many of us have learned to numb our pain, to avoid our pain, to suppress our pain, to take drugs, alcohol, addictions, toxic positivity, bright siding, meditation, gratefulness, positive affirmations. There's power in that. They calm you in the moment, but they're putting a band-aid on your wound. They do not heal you. They don't heal. Yeah. So that's why feeling the emotions is so important. This emotional pain gets trapped in our bodies, and it leads to illness and disease. Research shows that 75 to 90% of disease is caused by stress. And I'm going to say that again because this is important. Research shows that 75 to 90% of disease is caused by stress. And stress is emotion, right? This is big data. So this is about exploring natural, healthy ways to heal. I knew in my grief I needed help, but I also knew I didn't need medication. I knew if I had gone to a doctor, they would have prescribed me medication. I didn't need that. I just needed to know how to work with my pain rather than taking drugs to numb it. It doesn't heal. It numbs. It's a form of suppression. That emotion is still trapped in the body. This is the problem. And so my work is very much about teaching people how to heal themselves. I've learned to embrace the pain of loss. I don't fight it now. I lean into it. I know that this Grief causes friction in my body. I feel it. It's heavy, literally. And when I feel the heaviness come up, I lean into it and I know it's time to feel some of that emotion. Our bodies talk to us, yeah? We need to actually listen. This is, if you're sad, be sad. Give yourself permission to feel. Benjamin J. Harvey, who's one of my mentors, he says, if you need to cry, cry like crying is an Olympic sport and you're going for gold. Like, I love that, right? Cry like crying is an Olympic sport and you're going for gold. Why stop crying at 250 tears if there's 300? Don't stop. Get it all out, yeah? Sometimes we just need to be stuck. And that's okay. Honor the stuckness. I feel really stuck. I'm stuck, and be stuck. When you're ready, the friction will start. It'll feel very uncomfortable. And that's when it might be time to start doing some work. But sometimes we just need to honor being stuck. It's just where we are. It's a process. It's not a race. You can't fast track, like we can, because you can heal your emotion, you can heal, but it's not a race to get there. Yeah. Now I've got videos on my YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel, Christy Roberts Coaching. Christy Roberts Creating Change actually is the YouTube channel. So you can go on there. I've got tips for dealing with sadness. I've got tips for dealing with anxiety. I've got tips for dealing with anger. I don't have time to get into them today though. So emotions are fleeting in nature, even in grief. And so emotions are fleeting, they will pass. But what happens if we don't process those emotions is they build up in the body, and they turn into moods, right? And moods are stress, overwhelm, shame, depression, anxiety, burnout, chronic fatigue. Yeah, that's what happens when the emotions when they build up. They've got nowhere to go. They turn into the moods, and the moods is what holds us down. So if we don't process and feel them, they will turn into those moods. So this is learning to ride the waves. That's what it's all about. And also understand that grief will amplify old wounds. So it's like a trigger. It unlocks things that happened in the past. So if you have a feeling of being alone, abandoned, unloved, misunderstood, no one listens to me, anything like that, your grief will exacerbate these beliefs and these feelings in the body. So my work as a coach, as a healer, is to actually differentiate what's grief and what's old wounds. I don't have time to go into this today, but I just want to throw that out there. So, is this grief or is this an old wound? Like, what am I actually working on here? Because those old wounds can get triggered. That's why it's helpful to work one-to-one, with somebody as well. I'm going to skip past this. I am running out of time. I've already talked about triggers. Triggers are a map to your pain, yeah? But they're also a map to your healing. So how do we process emotions? We've got to name it. What is the feeling that I'm feeling? Name it. You might want to take a photo of this slide. Name it, feel it, fully own it, fully feel it. And what happens is it passes. And this is really foreign in the beginning. Some people don't connect with emotions. So when they're naming it, they might need to name, I feel tingly, I feel hot, my heart is racing. So it can be a sensation. It can be, I feel heavy, I feel tired, whatever it is. So name it, then fully feel it. Where is it in the body? Feel it, own it. It's like going to the gym. You just got to practice. This gets easier and easier. So about self-directed healing. So self-directed healing is a really fast modality that works with really deep emotional pain. So it works with grief, it works with trauma, it works with anger, overwhelm, anxiety, guilt, shame, the whole lot, addictions. And what we do is we release them energetically. So we're feeling it. Where is it in the body? Feel it more. We fully own it. Yeah. In my grief in the beginning, I felt so much physical pain. The pain in my chest was excruciating, and it spread. It came into my throat. Like I was in a physical agony. I cannot tell you how painful my grief was in my body. And I know some of you here know what I'm talking about. Am I right? It's very physical. When I did my first session, I literally biologically shifted the chemicals in my body. It was like I was in this big dark cloud and I came out, and all of a sudden in one session, the pain in my chest actually lifted, my speech cleared, and the fogginess kind of came out of the fogginess, like driving out of a cloud into a clear blue sky. It was insane. Like I actually biologically shifted those chemicals, because what happens in the shock, in the trauma, is the body releases chemicals and it numbs you. Your body knows how to grieve. Your body knows how to grieve. And as you move through that acute stage, the shock wears off. Yeah. But I fast-tracked that with this process. So it works emotionally, self-directed healing. It works mentally, physically, spiritually, consciously, unconsciously, and super consciously. We access really deep conscious epiphanies, awarenesses that we didn't have. We unlock stuff that you wouldn't even know was there. You don't know what you don't know, right? It works on every layer of your being. It's very somatic in the style. And the other thing is we measure everything before and after. So it makes something, because how do you know if you've healed? You measure it. We measure it. So you can see what's worked, what hasn't worked. Yeah. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to do a healing. So let me just change this. Bear with me while I set my screen up. I need to go here. And I've lost you all. Where are you? There you are. Beautiful. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take you through a healing. So this is just a mini group healing, just to give you an opportunity to release some of the energy that's in your body. It's such a beautiful process. And so this is just about honoring where you are, feeling what you need to feel. I might stop the recording actually, so that you all feel comfortable. Let me stop that. Yes. Okay. All right. You might get a pop-up on your screen. You might just need to say, yes, got it. And then that'll disappear. Okay. So just remember, when it comes to loss, when it comes to grief, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is the stories that we play in our mind. Yeah. The guilt, the shame, the what ifs, the if onlys. We can work with that. Your loss is just one aspect of your life, and your life, you are so much more than your loss. So much more. And, at the end of the day, grief is the price that we pay for love, because grief is our love. And your loved one is so much more than their death. Our work, I see our work as honoring them, as honoring their life. And the journey of grief is to find our way through this pain towards the love. That's the journey. That's the journey we're all on here. Because I know even those of you that are working in a professional capacity, we don't choose to work in grief. It kind of chooses us. Yeah. So we have covered a lot. We've gone through what grief is, the grief timeline, tips for grief in the early stages. I've talked about Christmas and special occasions, New Year's, how to support people in their grief and how to process deep emotions. And you know what? It's a lot, but I've literally brushed the surface today. There is so much more to this conversation. So, I'm actually working on a full day retreat, weekend retreat at the moment, among many other things. So, as I said, please feel free to come back. You will take in different bits of information at different times. I want to talk very briefly about next steps. I'm not here to sell you anything today. This isn't a sales pitch. That's not what this is about. This is a community service to provide grief support. But I do get questions about, the work that I do, what is creating change and that sort of thing. So if you are wanting to get into contact with me, you will find me at christyrobertscoaching.com. That's my website. If you're interested in one-to-ones or I offer free discovery calls, I'll take you through all that in a moment. This is just a copy of my YouTube channel. I've got heaps of videos on there. What Grief Honestly Feels Like is really powerful video. I've got a tutorial, like a grief education piece when grief first hits you. That's a really good one. I've got videos with these tips for special occasions, New Year's grief. There's a lot of stuff on there. So get on there. Have a look around. I've got a lot of stuff on my website as well. My grief ebook will be emailed out to you all. I also have a QR code. So if anyone's got a QR code, you can scan that. That's on my Instagram and all that as well. And that'll take you through lots of different links and access different stuff. But the work that I do, it's all about tapping into our full potential. It's about getting results faster. That's the coach in me. And it's about living our best life despite life, you know, in spite of the challenges that life throws at us, because, gee, it can throw us some curveballs, right? The typical clients that I work with, they're procrastinating, they're stuck, they feel very lost. Often they're very disconnected from their body. Stuck in a rut is a common theme that I get. They've got grief, trauma, they're angry. I typically work with high achievers, with leaders because of my leadership background. But that doesn't mean that's the only clients that I get. So my clients span from a 13-year-old schoolgirl through to Crown prosecutors and directors of large national organizations. So, you know, I can kind of, my work is, I just meet you where you are. I run a number of different workshops and corporate programs as well. So if I can come and speak to groups, if you know of any groups, I can come into workplaces. And I run these from time to time for free as masterclasses as well. So if you haven't spoken to me one-to-one and that's something that interests you, I do offer free discovery calls. If you know of someone who you feel would benefit from talking to me, I offer free discovery calls. So book in. I think I might have the link. Let me see if I've got it. I did save it. Yeah, there it is. I'll pop it in the chat box for you. So that's a link directly in. I did actually have to clear some time in my diary because there wasn't any, but I have made some time. So that's just to explore. If you've had any specific challenges that have come up through this healing, or you've got any questions, I'll stay on and answer all your questions for as long as I need to. Yeah, I can do one-to-ones and have free calls as well. So, you know, coaching and healing, it's not for you if you're not prepared to do the work. It's not for you if you're happy where you are now. This is for people who are actually serious about living a better life. I'm not interested in working with people who aren't serious about changing, because you've got to do the work, and it takes courage to step into this space. The type of work that I do, it is for people who are stuck. If you want to get moving again, I absolutely want to talk to you. If you're feeling alone and lost in your grief, if you want to still live a really great life, but you just don't know where to start, it's the most powerful conversation you'll ever have. If your mind feels overwhelmed and blown, you know, grief and trauma, it blows our mind. And so this is where it can be really useful to work one-to-one with somebody. I've got a stack of testimonials, a stack of videos. Like, there's so much stuff on my website, through my socials. Just look me up if you want to see that. I'm not going to waste time going through it. You can book in my calendar. The link's in the chat now. Yep, book in. I do have limited space. I'm nearly at capacity for one-to-ones, but I do offer like one-off healing. Sometimes I find in grief, you only need a couple healings. You don't need to sign up for one-to-one coaching. Sometimes we just need to go in, get out the pain, get you swimming again so your head's above the water, and that's enough. Yeah, Abigail's done this with me. That for now, that's enough, isn't it, Abigail? You know? And so that can be an option. So, you know, the one-to-one is limited. I'm nearly at I bounce between wait list and having space. I've got capacity at the moment to take on one or two more clients. So you can book in christyrobertscoaching.com. I have a contact page, and there's book a free discovery call there. So if you lose that link and you want to, or you're looking it up later, that's how you find me. And also I have events. Oh, the circle's not in the right place, or is it? Hang on, I can't see. Let's move that. Oh yeah, resources. So this is telling you about resources. I have a stack of free resources on my website: goal setting, procrastination. I'll be putting my sleeping tips on there. So you can go onto the website, resources, and get free stuff. There's a self-sabotage audio. There's a few different things on there. So you will find me at Christy Roberts Coaching on my socials. That's the best way to find me. Now, when it comes to this work, that's my boy Aaron there with the red hair. He was quite the character. It's so rewarding. You know, I get to honor Aaron every single time. I get to bring out his photo and honor him through this work. You know, this is how I connect with my loss. And in many ways, you know, I actually now view Aaron as my superpower. I view self-directed healing as my second superpower. They really make a difference, you know. I'm doing this because I want to make a difference to the world. There's too many people struggling. There's too many people suffering, and it doesn't have to be this way. Yeah. Now, this doesn't remove my grief. It doesn't bring Aaron back, but it is a great way to honor him. Yeah. And it's so rewarding to see people's lives change in front of you. It's just incredibly rewarding. So I thank each and every one of you for being here today. I especially thank those of you that are working in this space. It's such incredibly important work that you're doing. I love that you're here, that you're getting information for yourself, for others, and that you're, you know, doing this stuff. It's just so important. So much love to you all. Much love to our loved ones. And thank you for all being here today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You're welcome, Abby. You're welcome, Diana. And I am going to take any questions that you have. You're welcome, Carl.